Hello, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. As you can see, I've had to change my filming location this time. The lights in my room are all burnt out in the computer room, and it's kind of late at night, so I can't really get new ones right now. And I really felt like making a video, and I haven't released one in over a week. So I was like, screw it, I'm just going to make a video anyway. I've actually got time tonight, and I should be able to edit everything between tonight and tomorrow morning, and hopefully have it up tomorrow. So, that doesn't always happen. So, gotta take advantage of it when it happens, regardless of the other circumstances around it. So anyways, tonight we're going to be doing the Sorcerer Multi-Class tier list. And for those who aren't familiar with it, basically I just go through class, we look at all the different class combinations that we could make with it, and, just kind of talk about the pros and cons of each, and then just give them a rating. And like all of my other ones, we're going to be ranking them as A, B, C, D, or E, with the S tier reigning supreme above them all. And I tend to be kind of picky. I don't put a lot in the S tier sometimes. I know some people are like, oh, I think this should have been S tier, right? That should have been S tier. And I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right. I'm never saying that. I'm just saying they're all just different opinions. But I kind of feel like if I put everything in the S tier or tons of stuff in the S tier, then it just isn't very special. And I do want to be able to differentiate between the truly, truly elite builds and things that are like A tier, which in my opinion are really great builds as well. A tier builds are phenomenal. They're just not quite as good as S tier, which just has a little extra, I even think B tier builds are very, very good. I've played multiple B tier builds and they can be a lot of fun. So, take that for what it's worth. Heck, you could even play some bad ones and they can still be a lot of fun, but whatever. So as per usual, actually let's talk about Sorcerer a little bit before we get too deep into things, and then I'll explain kind of the criteria I generally use. So overall, Sorcerers, anytime we talk about Sorcerers, it's pretty hard not to compare them to Wizards because there's just so much overlap. And in general, especially historically, Sorcerers in 5th edition have just been weaker than Wizards for the most part. I'm not saying they're way worse or anything, but they don't have ritual spell casting. They have way less spells than no one generally. You usually have worse recovery features in a lot of cases. But the one thing that sorcerers do have that nobody else has is meta magic. And that can be kind of a game changer. Unfortunately, it kind of requires us to have a lot of sorcerer levels to really be able to capitalize on this. But I do think that it gives sorcerer that kind of unique spark that nobody else has. Also, while Rangers are probably the class that's improved the most since like the Player's Handbook to today, Sorcerers are probably number 2. We've gotten a lot of new subclasses. We've gotten, especially the ones from Tasha's, where both of them added a lot of spells and no one to the list. That was something that Sorcerers really desperately needed. They've really been hurting in the spells no one category. Now granted, it's only 2 subclasses, so I don't want to say that that suddenly propels the entire class up ahead of Wizard or anything like that. But it does give us more options, which are very strong, even in comparison to the Wizard. They also use Charisma, which can be, maybe good, maybe bad, but it does mean there's a couple particularly strong combinations with Sorcerer. And I think especially on a Gish type of character, Sorcerer starts to look really good. When you can quicken cast a spell that would normally take a full action and then still make all your melee attacks that you would normally be able to get as a martial combatant, that can be really, really powerful. The problem is I've already rated things like Paladin Sorcerer based on the fact that you're kind of playing like a Paladin, and I was like, if you're wearing full plate mail, maybe even using a shield, maybe not, whatever, right? But let's say you're wearing full plate. You're up in the front lines, you're attacking a couple times around, but then you're also, you're smiting a bunch, but you're also quick casting some spells, like some buffs or whatever, right? Maybe you want to cast a haste spell or a bless spell or whatever. You can quick cast that, and then immediately in that first round, get the benefits of that buff that you just cast. That's way better than not being able to do that, obviously, right? However, I already kind of talked about those things under, fighter builds and paladin builds and ranger builds and all these other martials. And my argument still kind of remains that if I'm playing like a paladin but just adding in some better spell casting, to me, that's more of a Paladin build. So for the purposes of this video, we're really going to be looking at, for the most part at least, Sorcerer heavy builds, and if we're making a melee focused build, it's probably going to be not going high enough to get extra attack. It's going to be the kind of the rule I use, right? So Paladin 2 builds with Sorcerer X, I think a perfectly fair game for this video. Fighter 2 or 3, where maybe you're just grabbing Action Surge. Again, to me, these are more Sorcerer focused builds, and you know, if we're not getting high enough to get extra attack, it's definitely not as martial focused. So I think that, you know, the ones where we do get extra attack are better covered under the more melee focused builds, if that makes sense. Obviously, we're going to be looking at all the subclasses, so we can get into more detail as we get there. Anyways, I always say in all these videos, there's 3 main things I'm looking for when I multi-class. Number 1, and usually the most important to me, these are kind of in order. Number 1 is I want to be able to become even better at the core thing I want to do in my class, right? So, you know, maybe I just really wanted to be able to like do lots of damage in combat and get lots of crits. So I combined Barbarian, who gets reckless attack, and you know, now I get to roll 2 dice whenever I'm attacking, and I combined it with, say, Champion Fighter. And now I've got Action Surge, I've got crits on a 19 or 20 while attacking with 2 dice, and then maybe I'm going to grab a Great Weapon Mastery or something like that. And I just want to make a hard-hitting melee guy who, you know, gets lots of crits, and with Great Weapon Mastery, those extra crits and killing shots can turn into bonus action attacks. And, you know, that can be a really solid build, right? It could also be something like, say, the Sorcerer Paladin combos that we've mentioned, where, you know, you want to be good in combat, you've also got a bit of spell casting, but you're like, why not just have better spell casting with higher level spell slots and be able to smite even more, while also being able to potentially convert spell slots into sorcery points or sorcery points into spell slots. It gives you a lot of versatility, as well as adding things like shield to that character or absorb elements and things like that. So these are usually what I'm looking for, is taking 2 classes that do something quite well already or very well already and combining both of them to get like the best of both. Reason number 2, this is usually to cover for weaknesses in the class. So this could be like, for example, the Sorcerer that we're going to talk about tonight has terrible armor and, you know, tends to be rather squishy. So maybe we decide to grab like War Cleric or Life Cleric. Life Cleric, especially if we went like, say, Divine Soul. Now we only need 1 level of Cleric. We can wear any armor we want, including heavy armor. We could use a shield, and we also get bonuses to some healing spells. And we might not grab a lot of healing spells as a Divine Soul Sorcerer, but maybe we grab 1 or 2 key ones, right? And now those are benefiting from Life Cleric, as well as giving us the armor and everything else, right? So these are usually what I mean by covering for those kind of like weaknesses in the class, right? Usually it's more of a defensive idea. Maybe it's to give me like, you know, proficiency in Constitution saving throws, for example, or whatever. So I might start Fighter, which is going to give me armor and con saves on, say, a Warlock or a Wizard, or somebody who wouldn't normally have it. Sorcerer, you do have it, so it's not as much of an issue. But that's usually my reason number 2. And reason number 3 is usually to add utility. And I think utility is a great reason to multi-class, but the reason I kind of rate it the lowest is because, especially in a party where you start getting like 4 or 5 party members, there's probably somebody who can already fulfill that role. So it's great if you like decided to multi-class into Wizard because you wanted some ritual spell casting. But if you already have a pure Wizard who's not multi-classing, he's also going to have ritual spell casting. He's going to have access to all the same rituals you do, and higher level ones on top of that. So while you have gained more versatility and more utility to your own character, you haven't necessarily brought more to the party, right? Another example might be like multi-classing into Druid so that you can get some wild shapes, and now you can scout. But if your party has, say, a Wizard with a Familiar, or you have a Ranger with Pass Without Trace, or you already have a Druid who can wild shape and has Pass Without Trace, then you getting this extra versatility and this extra utility, well, it might broaden what your character can do. You're not necessarily adding as much to the party itself. So in general, I think that utility is the weakest reason, but it's still a good reason. I'm not trying to, dunk on utility by any means. Anyways, So that covers our rating system, that covers the reasons I like to multi-class generally, and it kind of gives us an overview of the sorcerer. So now let's get into the heart of the video, and as always, we're going to go in alphabetical order, and we'll start with Artificer. So Artificer does give us some decent stuff as a dip for Sorcerer. As always, we can get some different spells maybe added to our spell list. We can get things like the ability to infuse items, make bags of holding, or other, lesser items, unless we're going to take a lot of Artificer. There are some problems too, though. I should also mention, of course, like I always do, that Artificer gives us interesting options for our bonus action, right? All the subclasses we currently have something they can do with a bonus action, which can be a nice addition to a class, right? Especially someone like a Sorcerer, where we might want to quicken cast a lot of spells, but depending on the scenario, we might run out of sorcery points way earlier than we run out of like dungeon to clear or whatever else, right? And if you're just constantly quicken casting spells, you can go through your sorcery points in an awful hurry. So being able to have other things we can do as well does help. There are some problems though. Number one, we already are using charisma. Now we're needing intelligence. I mean, we might need a lot of intelligence depending on what spells we take. But either way, it's, not the greatest fit. It's also only a half caster. And it's really hard to say that as far as the spell casting goes, anything we got here, we probably could have gotten from like Bard or even Wizard or somebody else who would have been a full caster. The only real reason, in my opinion, is to get infusions. And, maybe tweak our spell list slightly. I don't think those are bad reasons, but due to the fact that it's rather like multiple attribute dependent, due to the fact that I don't think there's any like real big gain here. There's some small gains, but there's nothing where you're like, oh man, that would be awesome on a Sorcerer, really. I kind of put Artificer in the C. I was even tempted to go D, but I do think that C is probably a more honest and a better fit. So either way, I don't think Artificer is bad. I just don't think that it's really adding as much as some of the other options. Next, we have the Barbarian. And Barbarian and Sorcerer are just not a very good fit. Obviously, the rage mechanic with any pure caster can be kind of an issue. We have done builds in the past where we looked at like Barbarian and Warlock, and we were able to make stuff like that work because Warlock could still smite. If you had enough Warlock levels to get Elder Smite, you can cast things like Armor of Agathis, which do not require concentration and work really, really well with rage mechanics, where now you're taking half damage, but the armor's still doing the full damage back to whoever hits you. There could be some nice stuff there. There are some other casters where you can kind of make it work too, where if you were going like Barbarian and maybe you wanted to go with like a Moon Druid, for example, and you're not planning on casting a lot of spells, you're mostly going to be using your Wild Shape and combine it with some Barbarian skills. And then as you get more levels, you might cast more spells when it doesn't matter as much, But you're probably not taking a lot of Barbarian in that case. The problem with Sorcerer is there's really no great interactions to be gained here. If we go Barbarian high enough to get level 5 and get extra attack, we could have got that from Fighter, we could have got that from Paladin, we could have even gotten that from Warlock, honestly. There's no real great gains, and obviously we can't cast or concentrate on spells while raging. We don't even get like heavy armor if we wanted that. It's just not great. All in all, I'm giving Barbarian an E. It's a pretty much just stay right away from this combination. So next we have the Bard. So the Bard, if we start Sorcerer for concentration still, which would probably be my preference, multiclassing the Bard is still going to give us a skill. It's going to give us Jack of all trades. It can give us expertise. It can give us some subclass features. None of these things are bad. It is a full caster. It's also using charisma. And so that's all pretty decent as well. I think where these kind of builds can shine a little more though, I kind of like this as a possible Gish build, where maybe we do take like 6 levels of Bard, we go like Valor, or even better yet, in my opinion, Blades, and combine that with a bunch of quicken casting and things like that from the Sorcerer. The nice thing is that's a kind of build we could transition into if we wanted. We could start Sorcerer, go to like 5 or 6, get our 3rd level spells, and then go into Bard a little bit. We could take 5 or 6 levels of Bard. Then if we wanted, we could start Bard and add Sorcerer, although I probably would start Sorcerer, honestly. The Bard does give us some nice spell options. And like I said, jack of all trades, expertise, skills, none of those things are bad. The problem is that I don't think it's necessarily phenomenal either. I have seen one interesting build that I want to at least mention, which was that someone had gone Lore Bard, and they would use cutting words with the telekinesis feat to like push and move people around. I thought that was kind of an interesting idea, because then they could still quicken cast other spells and still be able to cast a spell on that turn while also doing all this other stuff. And, it was kind of cool. I don't know that I'd put it in S or A, but I think there's enough there that it's probably a decent B build. Honestly, if all you want is some more skills and expertise and jack of all trades, that's not bad. It's not putting our casting levels behind. I think you could certainly do a lot worse. Next, we have the Cleric. So there's some nice things about Cleric, which is that it can give us new spells, it can give us domain features, better armor. There is one redundancy though, which is that we could probably get a lot of those same spells if we went Divine Soul Sorcerer instead. However, this does maybe let us pick up some of those other Cleric spells we may have wanted at low level without going Divine Soul. And that can be pretty nice. And like I said, more armor, there's some chances there. Overall, I give Cleric a B, but I have seen some really nice combinations. I don't know if they're good enough to go to A, but let's put like B here, and then let's move, or here I guess, and we'll move these ones up to like a B+, right? And that was the Tempest Domain Cleric with the Sorcerer, especially Storm Soul Sorcerer, and it was kind of nicely thematic there. Although I've seen people do a Draconic Sorcerer as well, and then, they kind of go with that element, right? They go with like Blue Dragon or something like that, and they use lightning. And, that's kind of cool and thematic, like I said, which is never a bad thing. I also mentioned earlier, Life Cleric plus like, Divine Soul, for example. I think Divine Soul is a good fit there, because then maybe we only need 1 or so levels of Cleric, which could be really good. But, even if you did want more, there's some potential there as well. In general, it is a pure caster. It is using Wisdom, which is maybe not the best fit. But, if all you wanted is 1 or 2 levels and you wanted to get, like, say, medium or better yet, heavy armor, I think you could do a lot worse than that. Next, we have Druid. And in general, I feel like Druid does give us a lot of the same versatility and the same options as Cleric, but it's not going to give us heavy armor probably. We will get wild shapes. It is a full caster still, but in general, I feel like Druid's offering us a little less than Cleric. I feel like Cleric's probably the better fit. So I'm going to say Druid is a C. That being said, if you just want to be able to scout in wild shape, that's not the worst thing. But sorcerers can get things like invisibility, for example, which might let you just do a lot of the same stuff, So I don't think the Druid is terrible. I don't think it's really strong either. So we're going to throw it right in the middle with a C. Next, we have the Fighter. And because I'm trying to stay true to form, we're really looking at less than Fighter 5, right? Otherwise, probably looking in the Fighter adding Sorcerer instead of Sorcerer adding Fighter type of range, right? That said, though, Action Surge is pretty strong. One of the interesting things about Action Surge is that you can cast a leveled spell, Action Surge, and then cast another leveled spell. But as a Sorcerer, you could also quicken cast a spell, meaning you could get 2 leveled spells and a cantrip, because you can't get a 3rd level spell there, unfortunately, but all in one round. And if you wanted to play like a bursty damage dealing Sorcerer, that could be a pretty good way to do it. And on top of that, you could be doing that while wearing, say, plate mail or whatever else, if your strength will allow, And even if you want to play a caster who's mostly in the back row, doing that with plate mail and a shield for 20 armor class, plus the shield spell if you need it, means you're almost never going to be getting hit. You're not going to have to make a lot of concentration saving throws on anything. And if you do get hit, you have proficiency on Constitution, no matter which way you went in this case, right? Whether you started Sorcerer or Fighter, you still have proficiency on con saves. You've got shield spell, you've got absorb elements, you've got a lot going for you there. And I do think that a lot of times we overlook just having a better armor class can do more to protect your concentration save than, almost anything else. So definitely some potential there. You can also do things like, even if you want to remain as a mostly back caster in this case, you do fight things, especially mid and high levels, where they can teleport. They see the casters at the back casting away, and suddenly that Merilith with her 6 arms and her snake tail decides, I'm just gonna teleport right on top of those juicy casters and just carve them up. But you're in plate mail, and you could be doing things like you could cast a green flame blade or a blooming blade. You could even cast that and then quicken cast another one if you have to, because you're actually decent in combat in this case. So I think the versatility is pretty nice. You've also got access to spells like Shadow Blade, although I do think Shadow Blade works better when you have an extra attack. And unfortunately, because of the new wording on Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade, they'd have to have a material cost to the weapon. So they don't really work with Shadow Blade anymore, which is an interesting change, but whatever. Some DMs I've seen don't really care, and they just let you cast Booming Blade even if you are using a Shadow Blade. So, as written though, I don't think that works anymore. Anyways, I'm giving Fighter a B, but I think it's a pretty high B. If it wasn't for the fact that you're not gaining any spellcasting progression, I might have even put it into A. But I do think that in certain bursty damage type builds, this can really, really shine. Anyways, next we have the Monk. And this is the opposite of Shining. You're incredibly multiple attribute dependent. You're not getting any spell progression from Monk. You're not really getting any armor improvements, although technically you are getting unarmored defense, but that's now using your wisdom. It really doesn't offer a lot. Going to 5 Monk for things like extra attack and Stunning Strike. Stunning Strike could have some sort of niche uses where you could Stunning Strike somebody and then quicken cast something that's maybe requiring a save that they can't make if they're stunned, right? Because that does happen on occasion. Overall though, it's pretty awful. I really want to like a Draconic Soul Sorcerer combined with a Way of 4 Elements Monk. But again, very, very thematic. The problem is it's terrible though. So there is that. Overall, Monk gets an E. I do put it slightly ahead of the Barbarian in the E tier, but both are awful and probably best not played, unfortunately. Anyways, flipping the page over. Next we have the Paladin. And I've already talked a lot about Paladin 6, 7, or 8, and then Sorcerer X builds. Under the Paladin, we spent quite a bit of time talking about it because, personally, I think that's one of the best multi-class combinations in the entire game. It is excellent. I generally prefer it over what we're going to talk about now, which is the Paladin 2 or Paladin 3 variants. But I still think Paladin 2 is an excellent, excellent choice. And the reason is, if you're looking at Paladin 6 to get extra attack and Aura of Protection, and then you're really not getting a lot from Sorcerer. Sure, you can get 1 level of Sorcerer and get Shield and Absorb Elements, right? But when I think of Sorcerer, I really think about meta magic. So if you're looking at 3 levels of Sorcerer to get meta magic and 6 levels of Paladin, you're already level 9. A lot of campaigns only go to 10, 11, or 12. If you're playing Storm King's Thunder or Curse of Strahd, they go to 10, right? Tomb of Annihilation's 11, And so if your campaign's ending at 10 or 11, and you're really just starting to get all the pieces of your build together at level 9, that's really late in the game to be putting all the pieces together. The other problem is that the really high levels, because the Sorcerer isn't going to be able to get 9th level spells, you're an absolute machine in most fights, where you can be attacking twice around and smiting on top of those and quicken casting spells and everything else like that. You have so much that build offers, but you don't get 9th level spells. Whereas the Paladin 2, Sorcerer 18, for example, it means that if your campaign does go to extremely high levels, you could be losing out on 9th level spells by taking those extra Paladin levels. And so I think the Paladin 2 build really shines in campaigns that are going to go to like 10 or less, or campaigns that go to like 19 or 20. If you think it's going to go to 20, both builds are suddenly very, very good, because Paladin 6 is still great as well, right? But especially if I'm going to be playing in a build or in a campaign which is only going to like 8, 9, or 10, Paladin 2 isn't a huge investment. I'm getting armor, I'm getting smites, I'm getting a fighting style, I'm even getting, 1 level of casting essentially from my 2 levels of Paladin. But then I've got all the sorcerer stuff on top of it. And I can still be a decent frontline fighter if I want to be, because like I said, you could attack, maybe smite, maybe green flame blade, whatever you want to do. Quicken cast another green flame blade on top of that and potentially smite there as well. You can still do good chunks of damage. And you have way higher level spell casting, level spells available, thus higher level spell casting and higher level smites, than you would have had as a pure Paladin, or even as a Paladin like 6 Sorcerer X, because you've just got so many more levels of pure caster under your belt. So I put this one in the S tier as well. Like I said, I think personally I still prefer the Paladin 6, but it's pretty close. And in certain campaigns, this one is much, much, much stronger. Now, if I'm playing like Out of the Abyss or something and we begin going to 15 or so, or if I'm playing Dungeon of Mad Mage and it's going to go to 20, but I'm going to be spending a lot of time in those levels like 10 to 16, 17, 18 range, then I'm probably going to lean towards Paladin 6 more in those cases. But the truth is, a lot of campaigns don't go that high, and this build really, really shines at a much earlier level than the more Paladin-heavy alternatives. So like I said, I give this one a solid S as well. Next, we have the Ranger. I feel like dipping Ranger doesn't really give us a lot. I much prefer the Ranger who grabs some Sorcerer in order to add more to their spell casting and make their Gish abilities even stronger than I like the Sorcerer who decides to dip into Ranger. I find it a lot weaker. And part of the reason is because one of the best spells I probably want as a Ranger is Pass Without Trace, which I don't get until level 5 as a Ranger. And that's starting to get to be a pretty big investment, right? I don't think it's terrible. You're still getting, like a fighting style at level 2. We could be getting skills, expertise kind of. It's not really called that, but, we got some expertise like abilities from Ranger lately. Skill proficiencies, but it is incredibly mad because now we're needing Dex and Wisdom, plus we still need Charisma. I think that in some certain niche builds, it can still really, really shine. But overall, I give it a C. I was tempted to go D, but I think that there's still enough there that it's probably worthy of a C still. Maybe not, actually. Who knows? Either way, it's kind of in that borderline, well, let's say a C minus to a D plus, somewhere in that range. I definitely think that the Ranger focused build probably gains more than the Sorcerer who just grabs a bit of Ranger. So moving on to Rogue. And we already covered a Shadow Soul Sorcerer plus Rogue combination. That was the last video we did. I would personally put that one into B tier. I think it's pretty strong. I don't think it's A or S, but I think it's pretty good. So let's avoid Shadow Soul since we did an entire video talking about that. And we'll talk about, sorcerers in general besides that, which I do find are generally weaker. I think if I wanted to go with Rogue, Shadow Soul is probably my favorite option. And just adding that extra stealth, maybe casting magical darkness, but being able to see in darkness, those kind of things can be really, really big on a Rogue, If I'm not going Shadow Soul, I don't know that there's as much to offer. However, going Rogue will give us skills, gives us expertise again, cunning action, It's not particularly mad because all we're needing is dex. You know, it's only one extra stat, and we probably were going to want at least 13 dex anyways, right? The only real issue is that if I just wanted like some new skills and maybe some expertise, I could have gone Bard. It's not going to give me cunning action, but a lot of the same things I'm grabbing from Rogue, I could have gone with Bard, and now it's not putting my spellcasting progression down very much, right? At least the spellcasting levels are remaining exactly the same. Sure, my actual, you know, I might have 5th level slots, but only 4th level spells. You know what I'm saying. But in general, I think Paladin is probably stronger, unless I really, really wanted cunning action, or unless I wanted to play this kind of stealthy rogue sorcerer combination, right? So overall, like I said, Rogue gets a C. Next, we have the Warlock. It's probably not going to surprise any of you when I say that Warlock plus Sorcerer, especially what we're talking about now, where you're mostly Sorcerer, just a couple levels of Warlock dip. This has been one of the most popular multi-classes since the release of 5th edition, and for good reason. 2 levels can give you Eldritch Blast plus Agonizing Blast. You can even quicken cast Eldritch Blast and do it all over again. You could be potentially adding, you know, another invocation of your choice, like maybe Devil's Sight or something like that. You could be grabbing like Repelling Blast and getting some nice crowd control push mechanics with that Eldritch Blast. And then, you know, when you quicken cast it, you're knocking somebody back 6 or 7 or 8 times in a round, depending on what level you are, right? That can be pretty horrific to whoever is trying to close with you. But invocations in general are great. You can even go to level 3 or 4, which gives you some more interesting potential, because one of the limitations of Sorcerer that we mentioned before, you don't have ritual spellcasting. But if you go Path to the Tome, you could have ritual spellcasting. In fact, even better than a wizard, you can get spells from any class that are rituals and put them into your tome and then use them. So that can be a huge pickup if you want ritual spellcasting. You can also go Path to the Chain and get like a super familiar. Because one of the things that we notice when we look at the Sorcerer spell list, while there's a lot of overlap with Wizard, there are a few differences. And the main difference is you just don't get a lot of summoning type spells. You don't get Find Familiar. You don't get like Summon Greater Demon or Infernal Calling or some of the new Tasha's summons that you don't get, you know? That's not necessarily a big deal. But if you wanted to be able to like conjure different creatures up, then suddenly that is a big deal. So, you know, being able to have like an imp or a quasit or a pseudo-dragon or whatever, that can be a really nice gain on a class like this. Especially if like, it was like, well, I was going to go 2 levels for Eldritch Blast plus Agonizing Blast anyway. Why not just get a familiar on top of that for 1 more level? That can be okay. It also opens us up to some interesting Gish builds where we could go with Pact of the Blade, go to Warlock 5, even if we wanted, and get extra attack. Maybe even get a smite. And now we're kind of doing the Paladin thing, but with Warlock, that can be pretty interesting. There's also another thing that's worth mentioning with Warlock, is that sorcerers have the ability to convert their spell slots into sorcery points, which we already mentioned. But you can convert those Warlock spell slots into sorcery points, and then they come back on a short rest. So you could literally sit down to have a rest and be like, I'm going to convert all my Warlock spell slots into sorcery points. And then an hour later, you've got all those spell slots back again, plus you have the sorcery points. It's pretty abusable and pretty ridiculous, but that's the way it works. And so it's probably not going to be a big surprise that I'm also giving Warlock an S. I think this is one of the best multi-classes with Sorcerer. Finally, we have the Wizard. Again, I think there are some decent niche builds out there. You can get ritual spellcasting, which we mentioned. Pick up Find Familiar or something like that. But in general, I don't think that Wizard's a great combination with Sorcerer. Now we're needing intelligence plus charisma. Even if we just go with 13 intelligence and we just take spells that aren't really requiring saving throws or attack rolls, most of our spell list, like, you know, 80 or 90% of it, is the same. There's just so much overlap. And unless we wanted to get higher level wizard spells, we're really not differentiating much. And in that case, why did we, if we're going to go like 5 sorcerer, 5 wizard, that's just way weaker than 10th level of either one of those would have been, kind of thing. You know what I mean? So I do think that there can be some interesting niche builds with this. Still, it's still better than Barbarian or Monk is. I'm going to give it a D, but I really think unless we really had our heart set on a couple of like first level rituals, I'd probably rather just grab them from Warlock or something like that, which is just much, much, much stronger. So like I said, Wizard ends up in the D tier. I feel like most of the really good Wizard stuff, Sorcerers already have access to anyways. There's just not a lot to be gained here. So anyways, that brings us to our final rankings. So in the S tier, we have Warlock and Paladin. In the A tier, we have absolutely nothing, although Fighter was kind of close. So in the B tier, we have Fighter, Cleric, Bard, and Shadow Sorcerer / Rogue builds. In the C tier, we have the rest of the Rogue builds, plus the Artificer, the Ranger, and the Druid. Although it should probably be Druid than Ranger, actually, now that I think about it. But whatever. We'll put that way on the list, though. We'll do Druid first and Ranger last. In the D tier, we have the Wizard. And in the E tier, the Monk and the Barbarian. Sorry, Barbarian. It's not often that you and Monk end up on the same tier, but today's one of those days. Anyways, obviously, like I've always been doing lately, we're going to follow this up with a few looks at a couple Sorcerer subclasses we haven't covered before. Because I like Sorcerer quite a bit, there's not a lot of subclasses I haven't covered. So we'll probably only do like 1 or 2 videos there because I've done most of the other ones, right? I don't even know if there's 2 that I haven't covered yet, but I'm sure there's got to be at least 1. So Coast of Adventure Guide must have given us another one at least. So there's got to be 2 out there, even if they're not great. Either way, though, we're going to do the Sorcerer ones. We'll probably try to do another Sorcerer Multi-Class of some sort that I haven't looked at yet. Maybe we'll do a damage build looking at Fighter. That could actually be kind of interesting. Anyways, so that's kind of that. And then, of course, we'll be moving on to Warlock. Yes, my favorite class in the entire game. Not the best class, but my favorite. And then we've only got Wizard, so we're getting close to the end of this series. This series has been incredibly long. It doesn't help that I've been padding the runtime by adding in a bunch of subclass videos on top of that, but, whatever. We'll get there. We're almost there now. It's right over the horizon, So anyways, that's everything for today's video. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I read every single comment, even if I don't necessarily respond. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.